Let's rewind the clock back in time to February 6, 1960, the very day a sweet little girl entered this world. Born to Edward and Norma Hutto in the cozy town of Largo, Florida, she was given the name Carol Dean Hutto. As the youngest in the family, she was showered with affection and attention by everyone. Growing up, Carol attended Largo High School, where her kind and gentle nature made her a beloved figure among her peers. Carol's family was quite a crew. She had a half-brother, Jerry Irwin Hutto, and while we don't know a lot about him, what was clear was that Carol and Jerry shared a close and special bond. Jerry deeply cared for his sister, and he always went out of his way to fulfill her wishes. Whatever Carol asked for, Jerry did his best to make it happen, showing the strong connection they had as siblings. Besides Jerry, Carol had 4 more siblings, 2 sisters, Pamela Beale Hutto and Melinda Darlene Hutto, and 2 other brothers, Maurice Barnett Hutto and Frank Hutto. Carol was a girl who brought joy to her family, especially her mother. They enjoyed doing activities like going to thrilling NASCAR races and exciting wrestling matches. Her mom fondly remembers her as a devoted Christian who chose her friends carefully. Carol had big dreams and a heart full of adventure. But sadly, she didn't get the chance to fully experience them and live those dreams. On December 13th, 1976, Carol Hutto was spending time at her home on Corvette Drive with her mother, Norma, and her half-brother, 17-year-old Jerry Irwin. Everything seemed like a usual evening. They were all enjoying themselves, sharing jokes and laughter. Norma was busy preparing dinner for the family, and Jerry was getting ready for a date. However, their evening took an unexpected turn when the phone in the house started ringing. Norma went to pick up the call, and it turned out to be Carol's friend on the line. So she handed the phone to Carol, and they spent a few minutes whispering to each other. But when Norma came back, she quickly ended the call. Strangely, after the call, Carol's mood took a sudden turn. She became incredibly happy and excited, which caught Norma's attention. Carol hurriedly went to her room, fixed her hair, and checked her appearance in the mirror. After about 15 minutes, she told her mom that she was heading to a store nearby, which was just a 10-minute walk away from their house. Even before Norma could ask what she needed from the store, Carol was already at the door. However, before leaving, Carol made a promise that she would be back soon. Later, Carol's half-brother Jerry also left the house for his date and said goodbye to Norma. The store was not too far away, and it usually took about 20 minutes or even less for Carol to walk there and back. So Norma expected Carol to return home in a half an hour. But after 1 hour had passed and Carol still hadn't come back, Norma started to wonder if Carol had bumped into her friends on the way and was chatting with them, which might be why she was taking longer. But after 2 hours had passed and Carol hadn't come back, Norma became even more anxious. It was getting dark outside, and Carol's absence was concerning because she had never missed her curfew before. At around 10 p.m. when Jerry arrived home, Norma, deeply concerned, asked if she had seen Carol. However, Jerry was clueless about her whereabouts, just like Norma. Upon learning that Carol hadn't returned home since she left, Jerry became even more worried. Norma urged him to go out and search for her. He started combing the streets, calling out her name, but didn't receive any responses. He even went to the store near their house, where Carol was supposed to go. But the store staff mentioned that they hadn't seen her today, which led to the concerning questions of where Carol might be if she didn't go to the store as planned. Jerry sadly returned home and shared the unfortunate news with Norma that he couldn't find Carol anywhere. Despite their concern, they decided to wait until morning, hoping Carol might come back home on her own. However, as the morning sunlight arrived, Norma became even more anxious because there was still no sign of Carol. Without delaying any further, Norma decided to call the police to report Carol as missing. However, the police informed her that since less than 24 hours had passed since Carol went missing, they couldn't file a missing person report. At this point, they also considered the possibility that Carol might have run away from home. But Norma wasn't ready to accept that Carol would ever leave her home on her own or run away from her family. She had a strong feeling that something bad had happened to her daughter. Because of this, Norma and Jerry didn't want to sit and wait for the police to do something about it. They decided to take matters in their own hands and actively search for Carol themselves. They went around their neighborhood, talking to neighbors to see if anyone had seen Carol the previous night. Most of the neighbors remembered seeing Carol around 8 p.m. when she left home, but no one had spotted her coming back home that night. Norma and Jerry also visited all of Carol's friends to find out if she had spoken to anyone or gone to their homes, but they couldn't find any trace of her. The sudden disappearance of Carol deeply affected Norma, and the entire community also came together after the news that their little Carol was missing to help in any way they could. At the same time, the police were also actively searching for Carol. They checked various stores, both nearby Carol's house and more distant, to see if she had visited any of them that night. Unfortunately, no one could confirm seeing her at any of those locations. The police noticed that there was a security camera outside the store that Carol was supposed to go. However, upon reviewing the footage, they couldn't find any evidence of Carol visiting the store on the night she disappeared. Back in those days, security cameras were not as common as it is today, so only a few stores had installed them, making it challenging to track Carol's movements. But it didn't take long for a tragic discovery to occur. On the evening of December 14th, 1976, Carol's half-brother Jerry stumbled upon her lifeless body under unusual circumstances. He had been searching the neighborhood on his own, desperately trying to find Carol. His search led him to the end of the street, near a building that was still under construction. This building was located at 418 Imperial Drive, close to a lake. It was there that Jerry claimed to have discovered Carol's body. The details surrounding how he came across her in this specific spot remain a mystery. Carol's lifeless body was found floating in the water, her clothes partially removed. This sight was shocking and deeply disturbing for Jerry. He immediately contacted the Largo police to report the discovery, and then had the difficult task of returning home to inform Norma about the heartbreaking news. When the police arrived, carefully retrieved Carol's body from the lake to preserve any potential evidence. It became evident quite quickly that Carol's death wasn't accidental. The presence of injuries on her body and a concrete block used to submerge her indicated foul play, suggesting that someone intentionally killed her and attempted to hide her body. The police believed that the attack likely occurred at the under-construction house, and then her body was placed in the lake. A crucial clue was Carol's watch, which was stopped at 10:36 p.m., indicating the time of her murder was likely between 10:30 and 10:45 p.m. After Carol's lifeless body was sent for a thorough autopsy, some unsettling facts came to light. The coroner found that Carol had been strangled, which likely made her lose consciousness but didn't kill her right away. Additionally, she had suffered from a blow to the head with a heavy object, resulting in a severe injury. Adding to the distressing findings, also had a significant burn on her thigh. The medical examiner's report uncovered an even more horrifying detail. When Carol was thrown into the water and a heavy concrete block was placed over her body, she was still alive. Despite the harrowing circumstances, she remained conscious and tragically succumbed to drowning over time. During the examination of Carol's body, the coroner also discovered 3 long hairs that were of the same person but seemed to belong to someone other than her. Additionally, a 4th hair, unidentified and possibly belonging to the killer, was found on Carol's blue jeans. This discovery held the potential to be a crucial breakthrough in the case. However, the limitations of medical technology in the 1970s meant that not much could be done with the hairs at that time. So they were carefully stored away, awaiting the development of more advanced techniques that could help identify the person responsible for Carol's tragic fate. For a little while, the Largo police had their eyes on Jerry Irwin, Carol's half-brother, because he was also outside on the night Carol was killed. Even though Jerry said he was on a date, the police discovered he got done half an hour earlier than he claimed. This made them wonder what was he doing during that time gap. The restaurant he went to was only about 8 minutes away from home, so why didn't he return home soon? The police started thinking that Jerry might be involved in Carol's death, since he couldn't provide an alibi for that time gap. They concentrated their investigation on him, but it didn't lead to any solid evidence. They couldn't find any proof that Jerry could have hurt Carol. Norma, Carol's mother, was convinced that Jerry cared deeply for his sister that would never hurt her. Despite their initial suspicion, the focus on Jerry didn't bring them any closer to the truth. After a while, The police cleared Jerry of suspicion as they couldn't find any more evidence against him. For the next 18 months, the police put a lot of effort into exploring every lead. But unfortunately, they couldn't find any clues to solve the case, and the investigation only went in circles. As time went on, the investigation began to lose momentum, and the case grew cold. This left the Hutto family with aching questions. What really happened to Carol on that fateful night? Who was responsible for her death? They not only suffered the loss of their beloved daughter, but also the frustration of not finding justice for her. For almost 20 years, the mystery of Carol's murder remained unsolved. But in March 1994, a twist of fate brought a fresh set of eyes to the case. Officer Brad Hoyes, sidelined by a work injury, found himself poring over cold case files during his desk duty. As he sifted through the forgotten files, he stumbled upon the haunting details of Carol Hutto's murder case, reigniting a dormant investigation. As Officer Brad delved into the case, he sensed that there were hidden layers that hadn't received thorough scrutiny during the original 1976 investigation. Driven by his intuition, he made the bold decision to reopen the case and retrieved the evidence box that had been stowed away for years. Among the contents, he stumbled across Carol's personal diary. Officer Brad saw potential in those pages, hoping the diary might hold the missing pieces needed to unravel the mystery of Carol's tragic end. A few pages into the diary, Carol wrote about her secret romance with her classmate. It was back in 1976 when Carol was 16 years old. She had a major crush on a 17-year-old boy, James Brian Coon, born July 20th, 1959, also known as Jimmy Coon. They both were juniors at Largo High School and used to talk to each other all the time at school. The whispers of their closeness spread among the school corridors, but they chose to play it cool and never openly acknowledged their relationship. It was Coon who asked Carol to keep the relationship a secret, as his family was really strict, so they decided to hide it from everyone. At one point, Carol also claimed that she was so in love with Coon. Coon was also among the attendees at Carol's funeral, who appeared genuinely sorrowful and far from a suspect. In 1976, during the initial investigation, Coon was also questioned as a friend of Carol, and he claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to her on the night of the murder, asserting that he was at home the entire time. However, in 1994, when cold case detectives revisited the case, they spotted a discrepancy between Coon's statements and what the Hutto family had originally told the police. They revealed that on the fateful night of December 13, 1976, Carol had received a phone call from none other than Jimmy Coon. By this time, Coon was 34 years old and had become a father to a daughter. Following his graduation, he pursued a path in the U.S. Navy where he achieved significant success. His military career was marked by his role as a submariner stationed at the U.S. Naval Submarine Base in Connecticut. Largo Detective Sergeant Mike Short, age 43, had a personal connection to the case. He too had attended the same Largo High School as Coon and Carol. So when he got to know about the case, he took the lead in investigating Carol's murder. Working alongside him was Lieutenant John Carroll, who is currently Largo's deputy chief. In a bold move, they made an unexpected trip to Connecticut, where Coon, an 11-year military veteran, was stationed. During this encounter, Coon's story drastically changed. He contradicted his earlier statements and confessed that he had indeed seen Carol on the night of her disappearance. He barely remembered anything, Sergeant Mike Short recalled. According to Mike, Coon explained, "I put up walls. If I remember, I'm going to jail." These words left a strong impression on Mike, leading him to believe that he had identified Carol's killer. However, the following day, Coon changed his stance. He sought legal advice, refused further interviews, and declined to take a polygraph test. The police and prosecutors faced a challenge as they lacked enough evidence to definitively prove that Coon was the one who had killed Carol on the night of December 13, 1976. Convicting him of first-degree murder seemed unlikely. Due to the statute of limitations, anything less than first degree might result in Coon going free. However, the evidence box held an even more intriguing discovery. Among the items in the box, Detective Mike came across a collection of unfamiliar hairs retrieved from both Carol's body and the crime scene, and these hairs had been diligently preserved. During the late 1980s, a pivotal moment in forensic science emerged, which was the utilization of DNA testing to establish whether someone was guilty or innocent in criminal investigations. As the 1990s progressed, the approach shifted towards examining mitochondrial DNA, which resides in small structures within human cells and is more likely to endure the test of time. Given these advancements, Mike was eager to conduct a genetic test on the hairs to potentially unveil the true identity of the perpetrator. However, there was a problem. They didn't have a sample of Coon's DNA, which was a crucial element for the testing. To obtain this vital piece of evidence, the detectives needed to obtain Coon's blood through a legal search warrant. With this plan in mind, they aimed to maximize the time spent with the suspect and decided to proceed strategically. In 1998, Detective Mike decided to bring in the reinforcements in the form of the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, or NCIS. They thought the presence of naval officials might make Coon nervous and lead him to a confession. On July 1998, Detective Mike waited outside the police interrogation room while Navy investigators Tom Asimos and Dave Early sat down with their murder suspect, James Coon. After obtaining the necessary warrant, they first collected a blood sample from Coon for further testing. Then Asimos and Early began their conversation with Coon, aiming to make him feel supported and comfortable. Their goal was to build trust, so that he might open up and gradually reveal the truth. At this moment, the NCIS agents were confident that Coon was on the verge of disclosing what happened on the night of December 13, 1976. Surprisingly, without any solid proof, they managed to make Coon break down as he wiped away his tears and finally revealed the heartbreaking truth about how he killed his girlfriend, Carol Hutto. Although Coon appeared emotional, the experienced cold case detectives weren't convinced of his honesty. The injuries Carol sustained, particularly to her neck and head, didn't align with a simple accident like tripping and falling. Instead, the nature of these injuries indicated blunt force trauma and strangulation. However, Coon had confessed to causing Carol's death. Although he claimed it was an accident, he took the responsibility for her demise, explaining that he failed to help her and attempted to conceal both the evidence and her body. As a result, Coon was taken into custody and anticipated his trial. However, on the eve of his trial, he presented a new version of events. In his alternative version of events, Coon initially claimed that there were no physical interactions between him and Carol, even though he wanted it. However, things took a different turn when Carol disagreed. Their disagreement escalated into a physical confrontation, started screaming and fighting back by scratching and hitting him. Fearing her screams would draw attention, Coon struck her with a 2x4 piece of wood and even tightened his grip around her throat. When he finally let go, Carol fell to the floor, unconscious. Coon was panicked and unsure, so he made a hasty decision to hide her body. He also tried to create confusion by burning her thigh, hoping it would appear as though someone else had attacked her. Regardless of the details in Coon's different versions of events, detectives arrived at the same conclusion, that Carol had been assaulted, taken to the lake, and thrown face down. Her body was weighed down with a concrete block to keep it submerged. Interestingly, the second story Coon shared appeared more plausible and aligned better with the evidence discovered. This version of events seemed to match the physical evidence and circumstances surrounding Carol's tragic fate. As the trial day arrived on February 9, 2000, the prosecutors aimed for a first-degree murder conviction against Coon. His lawyers acknowledged that he had some involvement in the crime, but they argued that a more fitting verdict could be manslaughter or even third-degree murder. When the jury received the case, they took just 22 minutes to deliberate before reaching a verdict. Coon was found guilty of first-degree murder. There's a chance that Coon could experience freedom once more. Due to the fact that the crime occurred in 1976, Pinellas Pasco Circuit Court Judge Philip Federico applied the state laws from that year. These laws allow someone convicted of first-degree murder to be considered for parole after 25 years. Interestingly, Coon chose not to address the court during the sentencing. But Norma Hutto, Carol's mother, felt the need to address Coon. She expressed how Carol had trusted him and called him out, saying, "James Coon, you took the trust Carol gave you, and you used it for your depraved wants." Norma's words did not stop there. She pointed out that Coon had attended Carol's funeral, pretending to be upset and acting like her friend while hiding his true intentions. Norma hoped that he would never leave prison and didn't deserve a chance to start anew, emphasizing that he had taken that chance away from her daughter. Norma, a mother with high hopes for her young daughter Carol, had envisioned a bright future. She eagerly anticipated the day when Carol would proudly graduate from Largo High School. She had dreams of seeing her 16-year-old wearing a stunning white dress, walking down the aisle to embark on a joyful journey with her husband, and maybe even starting a family. However, all those dreams were shattered in a single night, and strongly desired that Coon would remain in prison forever, never to be released. The Los Angeles police believe that Sherri Rasmussen's murder was the result of a burglary gone wrong, which is why the case remained cold for almost 3 decades. Then, when a detective examined the cold case file one fateful morning in 2009, he discovered his first hint that the murderer had been hiding there in front of them all along. Sherri Rasmussen was the love John Rueten's life. The couple first met in the summer of 1984. Sherri was a tall Scandinavian beauty with light brown hair. She had a broad face with high cheekbones and a wide set of eyes beneath heavy, arching eyebrows. John Rueten was an outspoken and endearing young guy with a thick mop of dark hair that made him look like a male model. Sherri and John were athletic and were runners on fast track. At age 25, John Rueten was a recent University of California, Los Angeles graduate, and Sherri, who was 2 years older, was the nursing director at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Sherri was quite slick. She had enrolled in Loma Linda University at the age of 16, and at the time of her murder, she gave critical care nursing lectures all over the world. She was thought to be intelligent and gorgeous. She was also focused and self-assured. She was an embodiment of the kind of person John aspired to be, or to put it another way, the way he viewed himself at his best. Sherri also had a strong attraction to John. Their bond was effortless and quick. When they met, all of their previous relationships and future ambitions seemed to simply dissolve. They connected and soon became a wedded couple. Their wedding took place in November 1985. After a busy post-wedding holiday season that included joyful visits to both sets of parents, they were settling into their married life pretty easily by the following year. On February 24, 1986, John had begun working at an engineering firm. Sherri was still in bed when he left their Van Nuys apartment in California for work that day. The couple had gone to see a movie the previous night. That Monday morning, Sherri was scheduled to give a motivational speech at work. Managerial tactic she did not feel was effective. She then informed John that she was considering just calling in sick using a back pain she had suffered while doing aerobics the day before as an excuse. John advised her to go to work and get the speech over with. When John left the front door at around 7:20 a.m., Sherri was still contemplating her options under the covers. On other days, Sherri usually left first for work. John dropped off some laundry on his way to work and arrived at his desk just before 8 o'clock. He considered contacting Sherri, but he didn't want to wake her up if she was planning on sleeping in. Midway through the day, he called home and believed she had changed her mind about going to work when there was no response. He soon tried to call her office line. Her secretary informed him that she had not yet seen Sherri. The secretary claimed that on Mondays when Sherri taught her classes, she occasionally failed to stop by her office at all. John made 3 or 4 more attempts to contact their home, but still there was no response. Although it was strange, but Sherri occasionally forgot to switch on the answering machine. John didn't seem really bothered. After the close of work, he ran a few errands, stopping at a UPS store and at the dry cleaner to pick up the laundry he dropped off that morning. On getting home, he was surprised to see the door of the garage opened. The Balboa townhomes were made out of white, 3-story mock Tudor structures with back alley garage access. A little balcony was located just over the garage, in front of 2 sliding glass doors. His and Sherri's cars would just fit in the garage perfectly. However, the BMW he gifted Sherri on their engagement was not in sight. Glass fragments were scattered across the pavement near the garage entry. John immediately assumed that this was glass from a car window. According to him, Sherri must have accidentally run into something while she pulled out. She had clipped the door and damaged the aerial on her car a few weeks prior. Oh dear, what did she do now? John had wondered. John removed the dry cleaning in a plastic bag from the vehicle and ascended the steps leading from the garage to the living room. He didn't start to get worried until he noticed that the inner door to their living room was slightly ajar. He carefully opened the door to peer inside. The sight he saw was one he wouldn't have ever imagined. His wife, who had been lively and chatty a few hours ago, was lying lifeless on the living room floor. Her face was swollen, bruised, and bloodied as she lay on the dark rug with her back to it. She was wearing her red bathrobe and had no shoes on. John initially believed she could be asleep, but as soon as he saw her face, he knew something was terribly wrong. Those who pass away violently stop moving in mid-stride, frequently with a frozen expression of final shock. Sherri's long, delicate leg was slightly raised and bowed at the knee. Her robe was flung open, and her arms were raised and bent as if she was struggling to stand up. When John touched her leg, it felt rigid. Her body was so cold. In order to check for a pulse, he pressed his fingers to her wrist. But there wasn't any. John was struck. He had heard about murders. In Los Angeles, there would be 831 homicides that year. However, learning about them never gave him hope that something similar may happen to him. Sherri was right in front of him, still shockingly and vividly present to him in every manner, yet completely, irrevocably gone. Her right eyelid was purple, swollen, and closed, and her face was coated in dried blood. Her mouth was open in a final gasp, and her left eye was open and looked up. For hours she had been dead. A black bullet hole was located in the exact middle of her chest, just below the rim of her exquisite form, fitting pink camisole. A terrified John called 911. In 1986, the crime scene was extensively recorded. There seems to have been a brawl. The top of a tall stereo speaker from the room was laying next to Sherri on the rug, flushed against her head. It no longer had any wires attached to it. A broken vase made of gray ceramic with a substantial base was on the ground. The shelves of the hardwood display cabinets were crooked, and a receiver and amplifier protruded forward from the top of the television. A VCR and a CD player were neatly placed at the bottom of the stairs leading from the living room to the second floor, as if they had been assembled for carrying, but were then left behind. The top of the CD player had a single bloody smudge on it. On the east wall and the entrance door there were blood streaks. 2 cords that were braided could be seen on the floor right inside the front entrance. One of them appeared to be the speaker's wire. One of the 2 glass sliding doors to the back balcony on the second floor was broken. This was the glass John had noticed on the sidewalk in front of the garage. Other than the items left on the living room floor, there was no indication of forced entry or theft. However, it was later discovered that Sherri and John's marriage certificate had been taken by the murderer. Homicide Detective Lalmayer found a pink and pale green quilted blanket on the living room chair that had a bullet hole in it and powder burns. A gun had been placed against Sherri's chest after the first shot and fired twice point blank, leaving 2 of what turned out to be 3 holes in her chest. The blanket had been used by the murderer to block out sound. One of the 238 caliber bullets that were found in Sherri's body must have gone straight through her. These 3 shots by themselves would have all been instantly lethal. Someone had intended to erase her from the Earth's surface for good. There was a bite mark on her inner left forearm. A cast was obtained for potential teeth comparison, and the bite mark was swabbed for saliva samples. Police investigators working under Lyle Mayer's direction questioned neighbors, family members, and friends over the ensuing weeks, but they were unable to identify any suspects. A week later, Sherri's silver BMW with the keys in the ignition was discovered parked on a street in Van Nuys. It had many fingerprints, a blood stain, and a strand of brown hair. According to research and community interviews, 2 Latin guys had been breaking into houses in the vicinity, and during one of those break-ins, they had abused a woman. Detective Mayer's viewpoint from the day of the murder would not change. He claimed the homicide resulted from a robbery gone wrong. However, Nels Rasmussen, Sherri's father, was of the opinion that John's ex-girlfriend, Stephanie Lazarus, who was a cop at the time, killed his daughter. In the months after Sherri and John moved in together, Sherri had confided in her father numerous times. She claimed that Stephanie Lazarus and John attended the same college and got intimate once or twice, but never made their relationship official. On John's 25th birthday, Stephanie threw a surprise birthday party for him. Unknowingly to her, John was seeing someone else. John never considered Stephanie as a girlfriend, and so he had to let her know that he was now in a serious relationship with Sherri. Stephanie, however, was obviously obsessed with John and wouldn't accept that. She subsequently showed up around John and Sherri. Stephanie Lazarus was athletic, bold, and had black hair. According to Sherri, she had unexpectedly visited their home a few weeks prior to their wedding. She went over to the apartment and left a set of water skis for John to wax. The skis, according to Sherri's father, were nothing more than a pretext for intrusion, and a provocative act. Sherri didn't like that another woman was intruding their home. She and John had a dispute over Stephanie. John, however, informed her that he and Stephanie were no longer together and that their relationship had never grown that serious, explaining that they had been dorm mates long before lovers. Sherri, however, did not want John to wax those skis. Nels claimed that John did not support Sherri and would not defend her against Stephanie. Instead, he advised Sherri to appease her. Sherri informed her father that the lady police officer had returned unannounced to pick up the skis that John had waxed against her protests. That time, when John handed her the skis, she made it clear that the woman was not welcome and requested her to go. Stephanie had not been at all discouraged by this. She had returned, this time wearing a Los Angeles Police Department outfit and carrying a revolver around her waist. She claimed to be taking a break. John wasn't around. Usually it was John who remained at home while Sherri left for work. Sherri immediately questioned if this was a regular occurrence. Fiancé leaves for work. An ex-girlfriend drops by. She didn't want to accept it as true. She wished to believe John. A few weeks remained till the wedding. Sherri did not cry easily, but one evening she broke down when talking to her father on the phone. When she and John traveled to Tucson for her birthday, she and her father spoke about it more. Nels reported that his daughter expressed a want for John to intervene and tell Stephanie to leave them alone, but all John ever did was reassure her that he and Stephanie weren't dating and that the best course of action was to ignore her until she eventually left. Nels recalled the visit Stephanie Lazarus made to Sherri's office at the hospital. Sherri had thoroughly described this meeting to her father. She claimed that Stephanie barged into her Glendale office and did so without waiting for the secretary to open the door. This time, the female police officer wore tight shorts and a tube top and a tie that screamed her athleticism and sexiness. She then made a chilling remark that says, "If I can't have John, nobody else will," before leaving Sherri's office. Nels Rasmussen told Detective Lyle Meyer all of these in an interview a day after Sherri's murder, just shortly after he had asked the detective the simple question, "Have you checked out John's ex-girlfriend, the lady cop?" Detective Meyer, however, discarded Nels and testimonies. He then told Nels that he had watched too many TV cop shows. Also, John had contested Nels. He assured Detective Meyer that his father-in-law's descriptions of the encounters were not accurate if Sherri hadn't informed him of them. Detective Meyer stuck to the robbery theory. Nels was shown sketches of two Latin male suspects shortly after the murder, and the burglary scenario was explained. He was unable to identify the sketches, and the overall situation was incomprehensible to him. He had to question the professionalism of these detectives. The residents had evidence of a fight. According to Detective Meyer, the fight might have continued for an hour and a half. Nels questioned how his daughter had managed to hold off two men for so long. Based on the bite mark on the Sherri's forearm, there was speculation that the murderer was a female, given that women tend to bite during a fight. But the idea was rejected. Along with the hole and powder burns on the blanket, Sherri also had a bullet wound in the middle of her chest. Nels was informed by Meyer that his daughter had been assassinated, not only shot and killed. He wondered why a random thief would just come to assassinate a person without taking anything of value in the house. Nels questioned the detectives if they had checked to see if the female police officer was on duty that day. He asked them if they had inspected or photographed her, but the answers were no. Stephanie Lazarus was never contacted by anyone. Sherri Rasmussen's case went cold, and the evidence of her murder was filed away in the commercial storage. Detective Mayers retired in the coming years, and several years were spent by Nels Rasmussen trying to get his daughter's case reopened. In the long run, many investigators declined to do it, and the investigation didn't pick up again until DNA testing was made accessible. In 2001, Sherri Rasmussen's case was reopened for reinvestigation after a committed Los Angeles Police Department homicide team used new technologies to work on old forensic investigations. But detectives were soon left looking for missing evidence on Sherri's case file. Luckily, in 2004, criminalist Jennifer Francis discovered the missing cotton swab containing DNA from the bite mark on Sherri's forearm. The DNA sample was entered into Cody's, and there was no match. However, the saliva and bite mark were determined to belong to a female, disproving the initial theory that a male burglar was responsible. After this discovery, the case was abandoned once more. In 2009, the Los Angeles Police Department renewed the case. After revisiting the documented crime scene, it was determined that the murderer arranged the crime scene to look like a burglary in order to put police off the case. In the notes from the initial investigation, detectives ultimately discovered a single sentence where Stephanie Lazarus's name came up once in the entire case file. Investigators, however, chose to follow the tip. They contacted John Rutan, who is now remarried with kids. He told them that Stephanie Lazarus had indeed been his ex-girlfriend, and her being Sherri's killer was all Nels Rasmussen's theory. He again said he didn't believe she did it. Investigators contacted Nels Rasmussen after 2 decades. Nels was angry at first because the police department wouldn't interview the killer of his child. However, after a positive feedback from the new detectives, he recounted what he had told investigators in the initial phase of the investigation. The detectives were shocked that all his revelations were never documented. When the detectives discovered that Stephanie Lazarus was a police officer, they ran her name through the department directory and came up with their esteemed colleague in the art theft division. She was a reputable figure in the department and had over the years been promoted for her diligence. Regardless, the detectives began to look into their colleague's whereabouts on the day of Sherri's murder. They knew as a cop she would be very careful if she wanted to commit a murder. They soon discovered that she was off duty the day Sherri was killed. They looked into the murder weapon. The investigators were aware that most police officers possess at least 2 weapons, one for duty and one for backup, both legally acquired and registered. Records revealed that Stephanie Lazarus had bought a backup .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver not long after graduating police academy. Detectives tracked the Smith & Wesson revolver used as a backup by Lazarus. It was discovered that Lazarus had notified the Santa Monica police in March 1986, just a few weeks after the murder, that the gun had been stolen. If investigators had been looking at Stephanie Lazarus back in 1986, they would have had access to all of this information. But they did not bother at all. The pattern in the evidence missing from the case file was now starting to become apparent to the detectives. It unmistakably appeared that someone inside the police department had been attempting to protect her. This was something Sherri's father knew and what made him angry at the Los Angeles Police Department for many years. The team of homicide detectives then decided to conceal the investigation until they find answers to apprehend police officer Stephanie Lazarus. They needed a DNA from her, and so a special operations team secretly followed her and her adopted daughter to Costco. When they stopped for a snack at a table outside the building, the team was able to recover the cup and straw she had been using. 2 days later, the lab determined that the mouth on that straw was the mouth that had bitten Sherri Rasmussen's forearm during a violent battle 23 years earlier. During an interview in March 2009, Stephanie denied ever killing Sherri, but was ultimately arrested. 2 years later, in March 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of killing Sherri Rasmussen. She was given a 27-year sentence. She and the Los Angeles Police Department had been sued by the Rasmussens. An appeal has been filed against a preliminary judgment declaring the department exempt from similar cases. The police department was reinvestigated, but it turned up no proof of an internal cover-up. The missing evidence from the case file still remains a mystery till today. 17-year-old Michelle Kowski lived in Seattle, Washington in 1990. She was last seen leaving one of her friend's apartments on August 18th. A week later, a woman walking her dog near Echo Lake Road and Highway 522 in Snohomish came up on Michelle's body. The area is about 15 miles from where she was last seen. Michelle had been assaulted and suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon used was determined to be pieces of concrete found nearby. Investigators collected DNA from the crime scene that belonged to the person that took her life. They also questioned criminals who have committed similar crimes in the area but received no useful information. No witnesses came forward either, and the case soon went cold. Detectives Jim Scharf and David Heitzman reopened the case in 2005. A DNA profile of the suspect was then created. They entered it into the federal database, but this unfortunately did not yield any results. The detectives could, however, rule out suspects. Recently, they turned to Parabon Nanolabs for assistance in identifying the suspect and obtaining justice. Genealogists at Parabon had to first deconvolute the DNA sample because it contained the DNA from both suspect and victim. Dr. Janet Cady is the Senior Director Bioinformatics Scientist at Parabon, said, "The crime scene in Michelle's case was particularly challenging. Without mixture deconvolution, the genetic genealogy matches would have included relatives of the victim and led investigators down a wrong path." Experts spent about 1 year building family trees and entering their findings into public genealogy websites such as Family Tree DNA and GED Match. Ultimately, this process led them to two brothers of the suspect. In 2022, after more testing, investigators announced that Robert Brooks is the man responsible for taking the life of Michelle Kowski. Brooks was 22 years old at the time of the crime. He had just been released from prison when he took Michelle's life. Brooks was living with a relative only a few blocks from where she lived. It's not known if the two knew each other. Brooks passed away due to natural causes at the age of 48 in King County, Washington on October 26, 2016. The estimated probability of selecting an unrelated individual at random from the U.S. population with a matching profile is 1 in 1.2 quadrillion, said the sheriff's office. Both the sheriff's office and Parabon Nanolabs praised Detective Scharf for his work. He was also involved in solving the cases of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenburg that I have covered before on the channel. Some of those who knew Michelle spoke at the news conference to share their relief that the case has finally been solved, including her friend Melissa Johnson, who had known her since she was 10 years old. "I often wonder what she would have been like had she still been alive and how different my life would be as well," said Johnson. "I now pray that Michelle can finally rest in peace." 23-year-old Diane Kazik lived in Nassau County, New York in 1968. She worked as a dance teacher. Diane lived with her parents after becoming estranged from her husband. They had a daughter together named Darlene. Diane called her parents on the night of February 15th, 1968 to tell them that she was going to the mall to purchase shoes. She never returned home. After a few hours, her parents got worried. Her father drove to the mall to see if he could find Diane. He found her body in the back seat of the family's 1961 Plymouth Valiant in the parking lot of the Valley Streams Green Acres Mall. Diane had been brutally beaten and assaulted in that car. She had been suffocated and had defensive wounds on her hands. Investigators released a description of a suspect they had. A white male in his late teens or early 20s with an average build, eyeglasses, and standing at least 5 feet 8 inches tall. Investigators said the man had been spotted at the movie theater in the mall shortly before Diane's body was discovered. Police also say the man might have been loitering in the area. At least 100 Nassau police officers searched the area and showed her photo to more than 2,000 people, asking them to shed light on her last hours. Investigators also collected DNA belonging to the suspect from the crime scene. Diane's estranged husband was questioned but ruled out as a suspect because he was working his part-time job as a taxi driver when the crime took place. Years passed, the trail grew cold, and unfortunately the leads dried up. That all changed recently. In June of 2022, when investigators entered the suspect's DNA profile into public DNA databases, they found a match. The man whose DNA it was is Richard Cottingham. Many of you will have heard about him before. He was responsible for taking the lives of many women. Cottingham is already serving a life sentence in a New Jersey prison. He pleads not guilty, but is facing 25 years to life in prison if convicted. He is due back in court on August 22, 2022. Cottingham is in bad health at the moment and had to be arraigned while on hospital bed, wearing a patient's gown and a face mask. Nassau County District Attorney and Donnelly said at a news conference that this may be the oldest case ever prosecuted based on DNA evidence. She also cautioned against being deceived by Cottingham's frail and sickly appearance. He is a violent predator, and no matter how he looks today in a hospital bed, he was not always a feeble man. He was a young 22-year-old when he took the life of Miss Kazik. He was strong, stronger than these women were, and he was violent. Diane's daughter, Darlene Altman, who was also at the press conference, had this to say, "I never thought I'd see this day. I had given up. But all these people got justice for me and my mother." Altman wore a necklace with a ballerina slipper charm that belonged to her mother. She was just 3 years old when Diane's life was taken. She also attended the arraignment. It was overwhelming. He just had this dead stare. I thought he was looking at me. It was creepy. Detectives are investigating unsolved cases of women between 1967 and 1980 when Cottingham was active. Although Cottingham was primarily a Bergen County person and worked in Manhattan, we now have evidence that he was also here in Nassau County, and we are diligently reviewing unsolved cases, Donnelly also said. 57-year-old David Evans lived in Claremont, California, 1985. He was the vice president at a bank and a former school superintendent. David lived alone after he divorced his wife. On October 13, 1985, David's body was found inside his home. He had been beaten badly and suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The discovery was made by Claremont police officers during a possible burglary call at the residence. Evans had been a Duke-educated school administrator who worked as a teacher and school superintendent before shifting gears midlife and entering the banking industry. He had been a pillar of the community who had been liked by everybody. Investigators at the time generated a few leads but were unable to identify any viable suspects, and the case eventually went cold. Authorities took a new look at the case in 2006 after advances in forensic technology had been developed. Investigators found a small amount of DNA left behind at the crime scene and fingerprints belonging to the suspect. In 2020, investigators were able to confirm that the DNA and fingerprints were left at the crime scene belonged to Hilary Marcus Duplessis. Furthermore, investigators established that Duplessis had lived in the San Gabriel Valley area at the time the crime was committed. This is not far from where David lived. They were also able to link him to David's vehicle that had been stolen after his life was taken and abandoned in Corvina, California about 2 hours later. On May 2, 2022, Duplessis was charged with ending the life of David Evans. He is currently incarcerated in a New York State prison serving an extensive sentence for a similar crime and will be eligible for parole in that case in 2033. Duplessis will soon be taken to Los Angeles where he will be arraigned on the new charges. Lieutenant Hugo Renaga said they think they know why Duplessis did what he did, but they don't want to reveal too much information before the case goes to trial. Renaga thanked a team of investigators, including those from the Sheriff's Office, Claremont Police Department, New York State Police, and the New York Department of Corrections for bringing long-awaited justice and closure to the family of David Evans. On May 11, 2007, 64 years old, Dennis Lee I was found deceased in his condominium in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He had died from beatings and stabbings. Tammy Mimes, the assistant manager of the Hawthorne Hills Apartments, where Dennis lives, informed the police that he had prostate cancer. He had few visitors and lived off of Social Security. Tammy said she got a call from a friend asking her to check on Dennis, and she told the apartment's maintenance worker, Robert Gross. Robert knocked on Dennis' door several times. He entered the house after not hearing back. He found Dennis there, lying face up on the bed with his feet propped up on the floor. Robert called 911 as soon as he noticed there was a lot of blood. The evidence collected at the scene was carefully submitted for examination to the State Crime Lab of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. Dennis's first wife, Christine Griffin, claimed that he had a challenging life. It's unbelievable that someone would stab him. He could hardly get around. Dennis and Christine had 2 children. Their son Brad was born in 1963 and their daughter Laura was born in 1965. In the 1970s, the couple lived in Olin Jones County, where Dennis worked for the Monticello Steel Company as a purchasing agent. Dennis has lived in Cedar Rapids since the divorce in 1981. In 1990, Dennis was arrested on charges of driving under the influence and stealing from local businesses. Furthermore, he was accused of threatening a man whose room he had rented. After Dennis' son died in a car accident in 1993, his life didn't get any better. Dennis, who had initially lost contact with his daughter, his ex-wife, and other family members, started reaching out to them again a few years before he died in late May 2007. During the investigation into Dennis' death, Cedar Rapids police executed 5 search warrants. They looked through Dennis' apartment and also the apartment of a man named Curtis Paget, whom witnesses said must have had an argument with the victim. Curtis's fingerprints and a DNA sample from a cheek swab were gathered by investigators. Additionally, they took a pair of his boots from his apartment. Curtis Paget is also said to be a person of interest in an unrelated missing person case. He was the last person to have seen 15-year-old Erin Pospisil before she disappeared from Cedar Rapids on June 3, 2001. When the police questioned him at the time, Curtis mentioned that in 2001, having gone to visit Erin's elder brother, who was a friend of his, he and Erin departed the Pospisil family home and they offered to give Erin a ride to her destination, which was her friend Brett's house. According to Curtis, on getting to Brett's residence, there was no one at the house. Shortly after, a black Chevrolet Cavalier with tinted rear windows pulled up to the curb as Erin was making her way back to his truck. Curtis said Erin went up to the car and had a quick conversation with those in it. Before getting into the back seat of the Cavaliers, she told Curtis that the guys in the car would give her a ride. Ever since Erin left her home with Curtis Paget, she has never been seen or heard from again. No additional witnesses have been found by the police to corroborate Paget's report of seeing a black Cavalier in the neighborhood. However, on March 1, 2023, 42-year-old Curtis Randall Paget was taken into custody and charged with Dennis' first murder. This specific case demonstrates the Cedar Rapids Police Department's commitment to the community and its victims, according to Lynn County Attorney Nick Maybanks. This incident shows the department's determination to bring victims and survivors' rights to justice, even in cases where the general public may not be aware of them. After several months of investigation and a recent last meeting, Maybanks came to the conclusion that Paget was to blame for Dennis' demise. The reason Paget was arrested was not disclosed by the police, nor was it indicated if additional DNA testing was necessary after the department's cold case team approached them to assess the situation. Still, during the press conference, a partial blood boot print that matched boots discovered at Paget's house was disclosed. An oven mitt smeared with blood was also found. The oven mitt's interior contains DNA from Paget and Dennis. Additionally, Paget's fingerprint was found on a knife sharpener and in a drawer in Dennis' apartment. Since her sighting in the spring of 2002, Erin's case has not further progressed. Erin was spotted in a convenience store in Cedar Rapids. She was in an automobile with Illinois license plates in the back seat. Cedar Rapids police received this report, but the car was nowhere to be found. They have never been able to verify the sighting. The person who saw Erin is still positive that it was her because he was familiar with her. Erin's features describe her as a Caucasian female with dark brown hair and eyes. When Erin disappeared, her hair had red highlights and there was a small scar above her eye. The devastating news of the death of Nikki Allen, a 7-year-old English girl, shocked the people of Tyne and Wear, Sunderland, England, on October 7, 1992. After her body was discovered in the basement of an old desolate building, the police were called right away to the scene. She had suffered a brick to the head as well as 37 stab wounds. Who could have committed this evil act on a once cheerful little girl? And what was the reason for such a wicked deed? Northeastern England's Tyne and Wear is a metropolitan county with a lengthy history. One of its major cities, Sunderland, is a fusion of tradition and modernity. Living in Sunderland offers access to both leisure areas, such as parks and beaches, and historical sites that provide insight into the city's past. The locals are renowned for their friendliness and sense of belonging. The maritime heritage of Tyne and Wear is a significant characteristic, and the River Tyne was crucial to its growth. Despite the region's generally low crime rate, the tragic death of Nikki Allen in 1992 has left a permanent mark on its past. Nikki Allen, the adored daughter of Sharon Henderson and David Allen, was born on August 30th, 1985, in Sunderland, northeastern England. She grew up with 3 sisters in the Weargarth apartment complex, which offered a beautiful view of Sunderland's East End ports. Those who knew Nikki well recall her as a lively and spirited young girl. Nikki enjoyed playing with her friends and cherished her toys just like any other 7-year-old. Cheese and onion crisps were her favorite, and it was a regular snack for her daily school lunch. The fact that Nikki's maternal grandparents resided in the same building demonstrated how close-knit her family was. Her grandparents were crucial to the upbringing of the kids, frequently helping Sharon with childcare. It was clear that Sharon was a committed mother. The welfare of her children came first to her. Nikki and her family were living a simple, happy life, but they had no idea that everything was about to change for the worse. Nikki Allen's routine appeared to be typical on the fateful day of October 7th, 1992. She spent the evening playing with Stacy, her older sister and cousin. As evening sets in, Nikki's mother, Sharon, made the decision to go outside briefly. She promised her daughters to be back in 5 minutes. The place she was going was not far. She was making her way to the apartment shared by her father and stepmother, which was in the same estate. On getting there, it didn't take long before Nikki and her cousin's laughter could be heard echoing down the hallway behind Sharon. "Mom, can we go to the park tomorrow?" The innocent question came from Nikki. Sharon gently told Nikki to go home and meet her sisters after noticing the excitement in her daughter's voice. She then assured her that she would join shortly. By the time Sharon arrived, the mood in the Allen family home had changed from one of merriment to obvious apprehensiveness. Stacy's voice, which was tinged with worry, broke the stillness. "Mom, Nikki didn't come home," she said. Fear took hold. In the hallways, Sharon persistently called Nikki's name. Every shout she made was filled with anxiety, but Nikki was nowhere to be seen. Nikki Allen appeared to have disappeared out of thin air in what seemed like a matter of seconds. Only 150 yards separated Nikki's house from her grandparents' apartment, where she was last seen. The shortness of this distance only added to the intrigue surrounding her abrupt disappearance. The police were notified of her disappearance, and they showed up within an hour. Even though it was economically underdeveloped and frequently disregarded, Sunderland's East End was home to a tight-knit neighborhood. Here, neighbors were more like an extended family who knew each other's daily routines. The rapidly spreading news of Nikki's disappearance caused the locals to come together as a matter of urgency. A search team made up of more than 100 police officers and community volunteers was quickly put together. Finding Nikki was their only task. There was a thorough search. The search team combed through recreational areas, industrial buildings, alleyways, and even the waterfront where the river curved through the city. The search was made more terrifying by the fact that this river was notorious for its deceptive depth and perilous undercurrents. The following morning, a terrifying discovery was made as dawn broke. The center of this tragic story would be the long-abandoned and dilapidated Quayside Exchange building. The search team, led by Nikki's aunt, noticed a pair of shoes outside the building. As they entered, there was a sense of dread in the air. What they saw inside would forever haunt them. Inside, Nikki's lifeless body lay with the horrifying signs of a terrible crime. She had endured a vicious attack with a brick and more than 37 stab wounds. The community was shocked by the discovery. An area where people knew one another and where kids could play unrestrained was now surrounded by a foreboding cloud of sorrow and anxiety. The search for Nikki's killer got underway. But the perplexing question persisted. Who could carry out such a heinous deed against a young, defenseless life? Following the tragic discovery of Nikki Allen, the police launched a thorough investigation. Interviewing the locals was their first course of action. This was done in an effort to piece together Nikki's final hours before she disappeared. The more they examined the accounts, the more discrepancies they found, especially when it came to the moment Nikki left her grandparents' apartment. While some said it was 7:30 p.m., others thought it was more like 9:30 p.m. Some even suggest later times. However, the majority of testimonies all agreed that Nikki left about 10 minutes before her mother. Numerous witnesses claimed to have seen Nikki near the Boarhead pub, which was located directly across from her home, around 10 p.m. She was said to have been engaging in the British custom of asking a guy for a penny on bonfire night. Unsettlingly, a different witness claimed to have heard what appeared to be a young girl's scream coming from the direction of the Quayside Exchange building. In a reconstruction shown on BBC Crime Watch, a happy Nikki can be seen skipping past the bar. The video appeared to show her walking alone toward the dock, but she eventually came across a man. Nikki was seen skipping gleefully behind this man who was wearing a crisp white shirt as they crossed the street. The police were able to find CCTV videos that appear to support these eyewitness accounts. Despite the not-so-great video quality, it provided a chilling glimpse of Nikki's final moments before her untimely passing. One name kept coming up as the locals were being interviewed: the Quayside Exchange building, where Nikki's life was tragically cut short, was frequently graced by this person, who was known locally as the Weirdo. 1 week later, following up on this tip, the police took an important step by apprehending 24-year-old George Herron in connection with the murder of Nikki Allen. The neighborhood waited impatiently, hoping that soon justice would be served for the young girl whose life was taken far too soon. The following years, in 1993, the investigation spotlight focused on George Herron, a young man who lived close to the Allen home. George Herron's involvement appeared to be supported by a number of pieces of evidence. In his living space, a knife matching the wounds on Nikki was found. Blood was found on his clothes and shoes as well. Herron's sister gave a puzzling account to the police, which increased the suspicion. She recalled Herron spending an unusually long time in the bathroom the night of the murder, likely washing himself and his clothes. He had never acted in this manner before. Herron vehemently denied any involvement despite the mounting evidence against him. He insisted that he hadn't left the house the night Nikki was killed. For witnesses who saw a man who looked like Herron in two neighborhood pubs, the Boar's Head and the Clarendon, refuted this claim. It's interesting that he was seen buying Nikki's favorite snack, cheese and onion crisps. The police speculated that Herron may have lured Nikki inside the abandoned building using her favorite snacks. Herron's defenses appeared to give way after 3 days of difficult interrogation, which caused him to admit to the crime. It's important to note that he had vehemently denied the accusations 120 times before he finally admitted to the crime. Even though it was circumstantial, the evidence seemed solid and the police were optimistic about getting a conviction. His trial took place in the Leeds Crown Court, where he was accused of killing Nikki Allen. But things changed in an unexpected way. Herron's recorded confession was rejected by the judge, who cited overbearing police methods as the cause. Herron was cleared of all charges relating to the murder of Nikki Allen. Herron was given a new identity after the trial and relocated from Sunderland for his safety. In an unexpected turn of events, Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, brought a civil lawsuit against Herron in 1994. She charged him with killing a child by abusing her. Henderson won her case and the judge ordered Herron to pay her more than £7,000 in damages. The ordered sum, however, remained unpaid because Herron's whereabouts was elusive. Nikki Allen's pursuit of justice was still met with more questions than solutions. Years after the tragic death of Nikki Allen, the pursuit of justice never abated. A new development occurred in February 2014 when Stephen Grieveson, a convicted serial killer, was detained in connection with the killing of Nikki. He was told, however, that he wouldn't face any further action in the case. After a lengthy questioning, 2 years later, in May 2016, optimism started to emerge. Sharon Henderson was approached by a woman whose identity was kept secret to the general public, who claimed to have previously unreleased details about Nikki's murder. This young girl, who was babysitting nearby when Nikki vanished and was only 12 years old at the time of the crime, decided to speak to the police after keeping quiet for so long. Encouraged by this fresh information, Henderson fervently argued for a thorough re-examination of her daughter's murder in September of the same year. She started an online petition requesting that the Northumbria police investigate the case from the scratch. With the petition, the neighborhood showed its unwavering support, gathering more than 500 signatures in less than a day. Sharon Henderson contacted Grieveson, pleading with him to share any information he might know about Nikki's passing. This was done in an effort to leave no stone unturned. By April 2017, Henderson had met with the Detective Chief Inspector, Lisa Thieker, and the Chief Constable of the Northumbria Police, Constable Steve Ashman. The two officers reaffirmed their unshakable dedication to seeing that Nikki receives justice. Was a significant development in October 2017. The police declared that they had been successful in obtaining a DNA sample from a male who may be connected to the crime. This new development gave hope for a solution. The investigation then took a clear turn in April 2018. A suspect in connection with the murder of Nikki Allen was taken into custody after Northumbria police conducted a raid on a home in the Stockton neighborhood of Teesside. The person arrested was formally charged with the heinous crime in 2022, 4 years after his arrest. 54 years old, David Thomas Boyd was the suspect. David Thomas Boyd was originally born David Thomas Bell on June 1967 in London. As a result of his father's military service, David Thomas Boyd experienced a childhood characterized by constant movement. He had no close relatives when he moved to Sunderland. He may have been more likely to frequently change his identity because of this detachment. He changed his name several times over the years, going by the names Jason Branson, John Eastman, and David Thomas Smith, among others. When David Thomas Boyd was found guilty of disturbing the peace in 1986, a darker side of him became apparent. This conviction was the result of a disturbing incident in which he approached a young girl and asked for a kiss. More disturbing fantasies about young girls were revealed during his subsequent conversations with the probation officer. David Boyd was uncomfortably close to Nikki Allen's family. He shared a floor with Nikki's grandparents at Weregarth. He was more than just a far-off neighbor. He was closely connected to the family. Nikki's babysitter at the time was his girlfriend, but despite being so close, he continued to have dark tendencies. Boyd was one of those questioned by the police when the news of Nikki's case first surfaced, but he was able to avoid being suspected by providing a false alibi. Boyd frequently changed his name over the years, perhaps feeling the net of capture tightening in on him or being motivated by guilt. His constant name change was a futile attempt to get away from justice's looming shadow. The trial for David Thomas Boyd began at Newcastle Crown Court on April 20, 2023. The prosecution painted a terrifying picture, alleging that Boyd had lured Nikki Allen, a young girl, to a desolate area close to the River Ware. It was thought that she had taken a blow to the head there, which had caused her to bleed. Nikki was not in distress when the witness saw her. Instead, she was skipping to keep up with the man. As the story went on, the prosecution claimed that Boyd had dragged Nikki inside the abandoned old exchange building. The unexpected event got worse inside. Nikki's skull was broken after being hit with a brick. The bloodshed continued after that. Her chest, heart, and lungs were the targets of numerous stab wounds. According to the post-mortem findings, Nikki was probably knocked out by the initial blow before being stabbed. A witness's chilling testimony accurately identified the time of the crime, recalling a scream on the evening of October 6th around 10 p.m. The evidence at trial showed that David Thomas Boyd, who went by several names, was 25 years old when this evil act was committed. He was charged with having circumstantial but strong evidence against him. DNA from Boyd was discovered on Nikki's clothes. Boyd offered an absurd defense, claiming that Nikki may have been exposed to the DNA from his saliva after he spat from his balcony. He also mentioned that he was familiar with the old exchange building because he had gone there a few days earlier with a young boy for pigeon hunting. Defense attorneys claimed that the evidence was just a collection of unintentional coincidences. Justice Christina Lambert emphasized the circumstantial nature of the evidence and emphasized the lack of specific evidence linking Boyd to the crimes. Interestingly, Boyd declined to give a witness statement at the trial. After 2.5 hours of deliberation on May 12, 2023, the jury found Boyd guilty of killing Nikki Allen. The long-awaited decision gave Nikki's family some measure of comfort. Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, shared her thoughts with BBC News as she reflected on the agonizing 30-year pursuit of justice. On May 23, 2023, Boyd was given a life sentence with the requirement that he serve at least 29 years before being considered for parole. David Thomas Boyd's first opportunity to achieve freedom would therefore come in August 2049. For those involved, the resolution of the Nikki Allen case caused a flurry of emotions. 57-year-old Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, expressed her utter dismay at David Boyd's sentence. She thought the decision was shameful and that Boyd shouldn't ever be eligible for parole. "This is the recurring narrative for families like mine." In justice, Sharon said, Nikki was remembered by Sharon, who was only 25 years old when her daughter was tragically taken from her, as an energetic youngster with a radiant smile. Over the years, Sharon felt the weight of the community's misdirected rage because many people falsely accused her of being a bad mother. They focused their anger on her rather than the real offender. Boyd's actions destroyed Sharon's family, but she persevered in her pursuit of justice for her daughter, displaying incredible fortitude. There were many difficulties along the way, including her own arrest due to her accusations against people she thought were protecting the guilty. At the time of the tragedy, Nikki's father, David Allen, was 28 years old. He said that after that fateful night, his life took a dark turn. He was incredibly hurt and furious with Boyd. "The anguish is indescribable," he said, highlighting the striking contrast between Boyd's existence and Nikki's short life. A surprising turn of events saw George Herron, who was initially charged in the case, receive an apology from Northumbria police. Herron's reaction was a concoction of sorrow, disgust, and rage, especially toward the initial investigators, who, in his opinion, had betrayed him. Prosecutor Richard Wright Kay noted that the 1992 investigation was rife with mistakes. The team that reopened the case approached it with fresh eyes and without preconceptions. They meticulously gathered 2,500 documents, recorded 1,200 statements, and obtained DNA samples from over 800 men across the country. The judge praised their extraordinary efforts and emphasized the crucial role DNA evidence played in convicting David Thomas Boyd. A group of kids playing off of Amherst Street in Granby, Massachusetts, found a woman's body on November 15, 1978. Buried under a pile of leaves, investigators were able to determine that she had been fatally shot in the temple. There was also evidence that the woman's body was dragged by a man's belt. It was estimated that her life was taken roughly 3 months before her body was found. Investigators were unfortunately unable to identify the woman. So, for decades, she became known as Granby Girl and was buried in a local cemetery with a headstone marked unknown. On March 6, 2023, the Northwest District Attorney's Office held a news conference at the Granby Police Station to announce the major breakthrough in the case. It was announced that the remains found back in 1978 belonged to 28-year-old Patricia and Tucker. First Assistant District Attorney Stephen Gagney said advances in DNA technology allowed them to find Patricia's half-sister in Maryland, who led them to her son. He was just 5 years old when Patricia vanished. Stephen Gagney said, "While it is satisfying to finally know who Granby Girl actually was, the investigation will not stop until we identify the person that took her life and bring the family an additional measure of closure and justice. This investigation has spanned decades and will continue until each and every possible lead is explored." Stephen Gagney further said Patricia was married to Gerald Coleman, and they were living on the shore of Lake Pocotopog in East Hampton, Connecticut, back in 1978. Coleman never reported his wife missing. He passed away in prison in Massachusetts in 1996. According to Stephen Gagney, Coleman is now a person of interest in Patricia's case. Before her disappearance, Patricia had earlier gone by married names such as Patricia Heckman, Patricia Dale, and later Patricia Coleman. Anyone with information about the case should call Granby Police at 413-4679-222. We'll email dwight@granbypd.org. Patricia's son, Matthew Dale, who is now 50 years old, also spoke and recalled his last memories of his mother. She was in the front seat of a stranger's car, wearing a vest. It was 1978. Matthew was in the back seat. A man he did not know was driving, but Matthew vividly recalls the last words his mother ever said to him before she disappeared. "She told me to go across the street to the playground," Matthew said, referring to a group home for juveniles. "She said goodbye." Now in middle age, Matthew's memories are fuzzy. Best he can recall, the facility was outside Boston. His father collected him the following day and raised him after his mother left him. Matthew has lived in North Carolina most of his life. He grew up plagued by the mystery of his mother's disappearance. Rumors swirled among family members, including speculation that Patricia may have entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. Matthew said that he was in his 30s when he accepted that his mother was no longer alive. "My mother fell in with the wrong crowd. She was not a hiker like some of the stories said through the years. I've been told so many lies about it." His father passed away in 2015 and Dale has felt somewhat adrift, although he is happily married. He is a father and has been a union electrician for most of his life. Several weeks before the identification was made, police showed up at his door. They asked him a few questions, explaining they found him through his uncle in a DNA database. They said, "Granby girl." "I thought, what is Granby girl?" Matthew said. State police investigators did not offer many details, but said they had exhumed Patricia's body. Matthew had filed his DNA in a database in case his mother was ever identified. He sent investigators a file of his digital DNA profile, and they contacted him by phone within hours. They said it was a clear genetic match. He has scanned keepsakes of his mom, a single photo baby book she created for him, a lock of his hair, and a small tapestry she painted when he was small. Matthew said he plans to arrange for a proper grave for his mother. For years, the grave has been marked only with a wooden cross. In 1998, Granby residents donated money to create a more dignified marker. Matthew said it was an awful end. "What I want to do is have a new gravestone made for her. She deserves to have her name on it." Sidney, Ohio, nestled in the heart of Shelby County, offers a unique blend of small-town charm and modern lifestyle. This picturesque community with a population of 20,421 is renowned for its tranquil ambience, making it an ideal place for families and individuals seeking a peaceful environment. However, like any other place, Sidney is not immune to the shadows that crime can cast. Although its crime rate is comparatively moderate when compared to larger urban areas, Sidney still encounters its fair share of difficulties. And this unfortunate case of James Royale also unfolded in Sidney. Born on February 25, 2000, to Scott Royale Jr. and Chelsea Royale in Louisville, Kentucky, James Royale's early years were spent in Taylorsville, Kentucky, alongside his siblings, Jessica Colbert, Jordan Royale, and Jaden Canaster until he turned 8. He then continued his academics in Fairlawn, Ohio. After graduating from Fairlawn High School in Fairlawn and Upper Valley Career Center in Pequea, Ohio in 2018, James showcased a remarkable array of interests and passions. Whether it was his passion for basketball or his unwavering commitment to bodybuilding, he pursued his endeavors with dedication. Alongside these pursuits, he assumed the role of mentor, inspiring and guiding others in their journeys towards health and fitness. In addition to his diverse activities, he worked as a steelworker, a profession that complemented his hands-on approach to life. Moreover, his fascination with cars was evident in his ownership of 3 vehicles. James also found delight in playing video games. Apart from his hobbies, James also had a high school romance. He met Allison Duckrow in high school, and they quickly went from friends to being in a relationship. The first year seemed great, but eventually the relationship turned toxic. Allison grew tired of James' hurtful words, and the way he treated her with disrespect. James, on the other hand, always seemed to focus on Allison's flaws and made her feel worthless. The situation got worse, leading Allison to break up with him and decide to move on by the beginning of 2021. But James wasn't ready to let go. Despite continuing to mistreat her with his words, he couldn't seem to forget Allison and started trying to reach out to her bit by bit. Allison, however, was determined to keep him out of her life for good. Around 18 months after their breakup, on July 30th, 2022, James sent her a voice note asking how she was doing. Little did she know, this voice message would be the last thing he ever said to her. Stacey Duckrow and her daughter Allison had just gone shopping and returned to the home at 2907 North Carthor Road in Sydney. Approaching their porch, they observed an unfamiliar car entering their property and parking behind their own vehicle, despite not recognizing the driver at the moment. They proceeded to open the door to their house and went inside. Moments after they entered, they heard the doorbell ring. James was standing on their porch, waiting for them to open the door. However, Allison's family was resolute in not letting him in under any circumstances. The family finally felt a moment of relief when James left the porch. However, their peace was short-lived as he returned after only a few minutes, this time determined not to leave until he saw Allison. As soon as James tried to push the door, Allison, who was hiding inside the house, dialed 911. At this point, Allison and her family were frightened. To stop James, Allison's father, Michelle Duckrow, shouted at him repeatedly, asking him to leave their house. However, James remained resolute, persistently attempting to force the door open. Although the police had been notified, it was taking them some time to arrive at the scene. Unfortunately, the door was not going to hold up until their arrival, as James was fully determined to break it down and confront his ex-girlfriend. Just as the door was on the verge of giving way, it happened. 3 gunshots rang out from the firearm that Allison's father Mitchell was clutching. James was pushed back by the force of the bullets, and he ultimately fell in the walkway in the front of the garage. As he lay in the walkway, neighbors attempted to assess the situation, though none ventured far enough to confirm his condition. Amidst this, the officers from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene. Inside the Duckrow house, the family remained unsettled by the unfolding events. Upon entering, the police discovered 3 spent shells scattered on the floor. Allison, who had been terrified, finally found some relief and embraced her father, believing that he had rescued her from danger. However, the outcome was different for 22-year-old James Royale. In his pursuit of meeting with his ex-girlfriend, James lost his life. While Allison and the Duckrow family can now finally breathe a sigh of relief, with their nightmare finally ending, a stark contrast was evident. James lay lifeless, his family still unaware of the tragic news that would soon engulf them. Following James' death, the Duckrow family was brought in for interrogation. After the rites were read and Allison's introduction was made, the interrogators started asking questions about James and their relationship. Next on the list of questions was whether James had any involvement with drugs. Now it was time to determine whether James was a person who used to make threats or if he had any history of violence. During another interrogation, Allison's father was asked if he had any knowledge of the messages that James had sent to Allison. Although Allison received the voicemail in which James clearly expressed a desire to talk to her, she was scared. Surprisingly, she never informed her parents about it. The reason behind her reluctance to do so despite her fear remains unclear. While there might have been potential for a deeper mystery in the case, it was kept straightforward. James was the culprit and Allison was the victim. However, according to James' sister Jessica, things were entirely different. Jessica believed that no one would ever discover the true reason why her brother went to meet Allison that day. While there might be suspicions that James intended to harm Allison, it would ultimately remain an assumption. His side of the story was never heard, as he was killed without being given an opportunity to speak. The actions taken by the Duckrow family were indeed swift and decisive, seemingly without attempting to understand the true purpose behind James' visit. Furthermore, James was unarmed, and the entirety of the voicemail suggested that he had no intention of violence, but rather was expressing his longing for Allison. Here is the complete voicemail that he had sent to Allison the day before his death. Even though the motive behind James's action remained unclear, the decision was final. Shelby County Prosecutor Tim Sell announced that the jury would not be pursuing charges against Michelle Duckrow for the shooting of James Royale on July 31, 2022. In September 2022, A Shelby County grand jury voted 8-1 not to indict Michelle Kowski on charges related to James's death. The decision was based on Ohio's Stand Your Ground legislation, which stipulates that homeowners are not legally obligated to retreat before using a firearm. Following the news that Mitchell would not be charged with the killing of James, the family of the latter launched a Facebook page to demand justice for the deceased young man. Amidst the global criticism and accusations against James, with some even suggesting he deserved his fate, the Royale family remains resolute in their unwavering pursuit of justice. Now let us head to Cincinnati, an Ohio city with a thriving arts community. In the Cincinnati metropolitan area, the city serves as an economic and cultural hub. It is the largest metropolitan area in Ohio and the 31st largest in the country, with an estimated population of 2.2 million. In order to conduct a wellness check, the Cincinnati police arrived at the 2500 block of Sarvis Court in Cincinnati on February 15, 2003. This occurred as a result of a 911 call about a potent and unsettling smell coming from the apartment. Authorities discovered a deceased man named Herman Brown after entering the apartment. He was naked and lifeless on the floor, with an extension cord tightly wrapped around his neck and multiple stab wounds. The scene was extremely horrific and unsettling, because they also discovered blood traces in the bathroom sink. There is not a lot of information available about the man who died, and it is possible that the police withheld information in order to protect his privacy. At the scene of the crime, detectives collected a variety of evidence strewn throughout the apartment, such as blood from the bathroom sink, cigarette butts, and the victim's swab. 2 DNA profiles were found after this evidence was tested. One belonged to Brown and the other to an unidentified person. The investigators searched for the unknown DNA match but were unsuccessful. This set of circumstances led to the homicide case being dropped, leaving Brown's horrible killer free to roam the streets. It would stay that way until 2023 when something revolutionary happened. The solution to solving the case turned out to be genetic genealogy testing. In order to identify suspects who might not be located in traditional law enforcement databases, the DNA profile recovered from the cigarette butts was re-examined and added to a forensic genetic genealogy search. This innovative method produced a match, connecting the DNA to Robert Stewart, a 64-year-old man. In order to validate this link, detectives performed more DNA testing, which finally proved that Stewart's DNA was on the cigarette butts from the crucial night of Brown's murder. On September 15, 2023, Stewart was finally taken into custody in Lima, Ohio, and was later extradited back to Hamilton County. He is presently being detained at the Justice Center with a $500,000 bond. He faces up to a life sentence if found guilty of the 2 murder counts and 1 felonious assault count against him. Melissa Powers, the Hamilton County prosecutor, praised the Cincinnati Police Homicide Unit. She highlighted the detectives' never-ending dedication to their cases and the victims they were assisting, praising their dedication. She underlined that no matter how long it takes to solve the case, they are dedicated to seeking justice. Powers also conveyed her appreciation for giving Brown's family and friends a sense of closure, saying that Robert Stewart's long-awaited arrest had brought much-needed justice and closure to this devastating case. In 1998, Renee Sweeney, then 23 years old, resided in Sudbury. Sudbury is a city in Ontario, Canada. Renee was a Laurentian University music student who supplemented her education by working at an adult video store. When no one else was around at the store, she could complete her homework because it was quiet and fit into her schedule. Renee was working at the Paris Street video store. On January 27, 1998, just before 11 in the morning, a man came into the store and went up to the counter. After giving Renee 30 stab wounds, he stole $200 from the cash register. After that, the man went to clean up in the restroom. The man was shocked to discover Renee was still alive when he came out of the restroom. She was attempting to dial the emergency number on the phone behind the counter. The man decided to complete his evil deed. There was an intense struggle between him and Renee. During the struggle, Renee succeeded in scratching the man, but sadly, her wounds proved fatal. The man was observed running from the shop. Large volumes of evidence were gathered from the scene by the police who arrived on the scene shortly after. A lightweight windbreaker-style jacket and white cotton gloves that belonged to the suspect were found nearby in a wooded area by police tracking dogs. Renee's fingernails and the store restroom both had the offender's DNA on them. Seeing the unidentified man fleeing from the store, witnesses were able to provide investigators with a comprehensive account. He was described as being white in his early 20s with short dark hair, weighing between 140 and 150 pounds, standing between 5 and 6 feet tall and having a slim build. It was also thought that he wore spectacles. In the hopes that someone would come forward and identify the man, a sketch was circulated throughout Sudbury. On February 11, 1998, 2 weeks after the crime, Sudbury police declared that they had charged 31-year-old John Federley with killing Renee. Soon after, police acknowledged their error and let him go. It was declared the next day that the evidence was insufficient to pin John Federley to the crime. When more and more people became aware of the case, the reward for information was increased from $25,000 to $30,000. Even though the culprit's DNA had been gathered by investigators, the National DNA Database did not yield a match. Every 30 days, Greater Sudbury police officers kept checking the databases in order to rule out men in the area. Investigators asked them to submit a DNA sample in 1999. When hundreds of men provided their DNA to Sudbury police on December 2, 1999, it was the biggest DNA collection ever for a single police investigation in Canadian history. Michael Wayne McGrady, a serial offender from New Brunswick, was identified as a potential suspect in Renee's case on March 23, 2000. He was found guilty of killing 7 other people. However, no hard evidence connecting him to Renee's murder was discovered. In an effort to gather information about the crime, Sudbury police launched the ReneeSweeney.com website on April 30, 2003. The family of Renee endured an excruciating wait for justice. In 2006, Carol Strachan, Renee's mother, released a CD of music called Remembering Renee Sweeney. In 2017, Kim Sweeney, her sister, stated that she had little memory of the hours, days, and weeks that followed the announcement of Renee's horrible ordeal. Kim received a call from her stepfather while she was at school, informing her that something untoward had occurred and she should return home. Her initial assumption was that something had to have happened to her multiple sclerosis mother. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing and wondered why I was not being told to go to the hospital instead. But I got in my car and headed home right away anyways, she explained. I would usually drive past Renee's work, but for some reason I did not that day. She knew something more was wrong when she arrived at the house and heard her mother sobbing. They told me that Renee had been shot because that's what they thought initially. Kim continued, so I went to grab my coat, wondering why we're all just standing around the house. But then they told me she wasn't with us anymore and I just dropped to my knees. From that day forward, our lives changed forever. My mom never walked again. She said it was just too hard for her to deal with. Her condition deteriorated pretty badly after and she never really came back from it. And in November 2017, our mother passed away, without ever finding out who took her daughter's life. I wish that she had a chance to close that book, Kim said. Kim had few surviving family members after Renee's multiple sclerosis, afflicted biological father, committed suicide in 1990, and her stepfather passed away recently. She claims that the fact that her own 2 small children will never have the opportunity to meet their aunt is what breaks her heart the most. She said they would have adored her, and she would have loved them. She ponders where Renee would be now and what she would have done with her life. I still think about it and her every day, said Kim. I just keep having these same questions run through my head. Why would someone do this? Why her? Is he still out there? I think that sometimes people just don't want to get involved, but I can't express how important it would be to finally get justice for my sister. She concluded, if there is any information or anyone who remembers anything, I hope they remember and realize that the case has not been closed. The Greater Sudbury Police Service revealed in 2017 that it had partnered with Virginia-based technology startup Parabon Nanolabs, which specializes in DNA phenotyping. They unveiled a composite drawing of the offender on January 23, 2017, which was made possible by DNA technology known as phenotyping. The phrase describes a method that uses DNA evidence to forecast a suspect's appearance. The composite sketch, according to Greater Sudbury Police Constable Megan O'Malley, has given authorities a more precise picture of the suspect's physical characteristics. We do know that he is of European descent, that he has light skin, he has either blue or green eyes, brown or blonde hair, and might have freckles. Following the image's increased public interest in the case, Sudbury Police received 360 tips from the public between 2017 and 2018. About 200 potential suspects were culled from those tips via DNA testing or other methods. In 2018, the lead investigator on the case, Detective Sergeant Robert Weston, stated, "The fact that this has gone unsolved for 20 years is mind-blowing and frustrating at the same time." He added that although it is challenging to look into a crime that occurred so long ago, he is committed to moving the case along and finding the person who committed it. The more you get involved in a case like this, you almost build a relationship somewhat with the victim. At the end of the day, the focus is on Renee. I still remain confident that the suspect will be identified. By the end of 2018, detectives had investigated thousands of tips and excluded 1,800 individuals. After 20 years, most people thought the suspect would never be apprehended. So it came as a surprise when Sudbury Police announced on December 12, 2018, that they had taken 38-year-old Robert Stephen Wright into custody and were charging him of killing Renee. His DNA was identical to that of the offender. At the time of the murder, was an 18-year-old student at Lockerbie Composite School. He was a lab technician in North Bay when he was arrested. When Robert Wright was taken into custody, Chief of Police Paul Peterson stated, "We have been actively investigating information and tips throughout the past 20 years, and up until today, Wright has made a number of court appearances since then. Both in May 2020 and March 2019, he was refused bail. A judge decided on October 8, 2020, that Wright's trial would take place in Sudbury. This came after his attorneys requested a change of venue, claiming that the city's extensive media coverage would make it challenging to find an impartial jury. On February 21, 2023, Robert Stephen Wright's trial finally began. Wright denied having any part in Renee's murder. He said that on January 27, 1998, in the early morning, he was concluding an exam at Lockerbie High School in Sudbury. Wright claimed that on the chilly morning after his exam, he was dressed in a long-sleeve t-shirt, jeans, running shoes, gloves, and a teal jacket. Robert Wright declared he had some free time and made the decision to visit the Parish Street Adults Only Video store. Wright testified that because the store's doors were covered and dark, he was unable to see inside before going in. Wright testified in court that as soon as he walked into the store, he saw video boxes scattered all over the carpet. The next thing he claimed to have noticed was that something had spilled onto the floor, but he claimed that his mind had not yet registered the possibility that it might have been blood. Wright claimed that he continued to look around the store after seeing Renee Sweeney's body lying on the ground. Robert Wright testified before the jury that he approached Sweeney's body to feel for a pulse and to see if she was still breathing. He claimed this was something he had learned as a Boy Scout. He claimed he shook Renee's shoulder with his right hand and inquired as to her well-being. But in the end, he claimed he was unable to feel anything, neither a pulse nor a breath. Wright abruptly claimed to have retreated from Renee, overwhelmed. He admitted to the court that he was terrified when he saw blood on his jacket. "I ran because I was terrified," he testified in court. "I was a foolish child. I wished I had stayed. I'm not sure what was going through my mind. At that point, I felt completely overwhelmed. All I wanted to do was get away." Wright testified before the jury that he had to steady himself after backing away from the body and that he couldn't recall what he was holding. Since a fingerprint matching Wright's DNA was discovered on a cash tray on the counter, Wright was questioned about it. Wright added that he wasn't sure what he grabbed onto while attempting to steady himself and that he wasn't aware of the tray. Wright denied stealing anything from the store and denied flipping the money clips on the cash tray up. The next thing he recalled, he claimed, was squatting down, grabbing his teal jacket and gloves and taking off. He was questioned about his decision to throw away his gloves and jacket. At that moment, I became aware that I had fled a crime scene and I was afraid I would be charged. I've never made a worse choice than to run. I'm not even sure if I made that choice on purpose, he said. Following that, Wright claimed he had considered visiting a friend's house for a short while, but changed his mind because he didn't want to involve anyone else. He claimed that from the city center mall in downtown Sudbury, he rode the first bus home to Valcaron. Wright claimed that afternoon when he got home, the house was empty. He testified in court that he never disclosed what had happened to anyone, not even his parents. All I wanted to do was put the whole thing behind me and move on. It was extremely traumatic. I was embarrassed to run, and I also didn't want to worry them. The story by Robert Wright had a lot of contradictions. How his DNA ended up in the restroom and under Renee's fingernails was not explained. Furthermore, it did not clarify how his fingerprints came to be beneath the cash box. Moreover, no other person was observed at the crime scene and no additional DNA was discovered. He was found guilty of every charge brought against him on March 29th. The jury deliberated for slightly over a day before returning its verdict in the Sudbury courthouse. A cheer erupted from the Sweeney family side of the courtroom, and people began giving each other heartfelt hugs. Wright's father waved meekly, and his mother had tears in her eyes as they watched their 43-year-old son being led out of the courtroom by police officers. Reporters were informed by Kim, Renee's sister, and her smiling family friend, Kelly Irvine, that they were overjoyed and ecstatic with the jury's verdict. Following the verdict, Kelly Irvine declared, "After what horribly happened 25 years ago, Renee Sweeney got justice today." On June 29, 2023, Judge Robbie Gordon sentenced Robert Stephen Wright to 25 years in prison. The final words in Renee's victim's statement came from her sister, Kim. "Do you know what it's like to have lost your best friend? I have searched the English dictionary for words to express the misery that losing Renee has brought to my family, but none exists. I had to be reminded of the brutality by glancing at that jacket that had my sister's blood on it. I'm requesting that you give him the harshest punishment you can. A quarter of our lives have been lost. He ought to be given 25 years to reflect on his actions." Barbara Brodkin, who was 42 years old, was discovered dead in her Balliol Street apartment in Midtown Toronto early on Friday, March 19, 1993. Zachary, her 6-year-old son, found her close to her bedroom closet. She had been fatally stabbed in the chest and displayed signs of being strangled. The detectives had no idea that it would take them more than 30 years to solve this case. What caused this tragic incident and who might have been responsible? Canada's bustling metropolis of Toronto is renowned for its stunning skyline, which features the recognizable CN Tower. The city's diverse population of nearly 2.8 million people contributes to its active way of life. Living in Toronto provides access to a variety of historic and recreational destinations. It is one of the most multicultural cities in the world because of the diversity of its residents' cultures. One of Toronto's distinctive qualities is its diversity. However, Toronto faces difficulties just like any other big city. Although relatively low when compared to other major cities, it still has a high crime rate, and it is in this setting that our story today began. Barbara Brodkin was born in the thriving city of Toronto on April 24, 1950. Although her early years were somewhat a mystery, Toronto served as her residence during those crucial years. Barbara first met Christopher Barry in the 1980s. They were immediately led down the aisle by their undeniable connection. When their son, Zachary, was born in 1987, their happiness increased. In the subsequent years, though, things began to go south. Christopher's actions changed. He started acting aloof and occasionally hostile. Barbara found the strength to leave the marriage for her son's sake, moving into a new apartment at 155 Balliol Street, which is located halfway between Mount Pleasant Road and Yonge Street. She juggled multiple responsibilities while working tirelessly as a secretary and typist to protect Zachary. She even dabbled in covert marijuana sales. Her main objective was to provide Zachary with the best life she could. Zachary was 6 years old in 1993 and Barbara was 42. In the hopes of better days ahead, Mother and son were living life to the fullest. Unknown to them, however, a shadow lingered nearby and threatened to upend everything. The morning of March 19, 1993 in Toronto was ordinary as usual. As people left for their daily tasks, the city was bustling, but at the Brodkin home on Balliol Street, there was an unusual silence. Young Zachary, who was in first grade and only 6 years old, realized he had slept too much. It was unusual that his mother, Barbara, hadn't woken him up for school. Zachary started looking around the apartment for his mother in confusion. Why didn't she wake him up? He pushed the door open and went into her room, hoping to see her still asleep. Instead, he saw something that no child should ever have to see. Barbara's body was still and next to her closet in her bedroom. There was blood all around her. The closet door was half open and suggested a struggle. Zachary panicked and thought back to his mother's instructions for an emergency. He quickly dialed 911 on the home phone. When Zachary described the horrific scene, the operator, who had initially been dubious upon hearing a child's voice, quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. Within minutes, police cars converged on the Brodkin family's home, heralding the start of a case that would trouble Toronto for years to come. Balliol Street reverberated with the piercing sound of sirens. Barbara Brodkin's tragic death was thoroughly and quickly investigated. Rob Thomas, a constable, was the first to get to the scene. It was heartbreaking to see young Zachary alone, who appeared traumatized. Thomas hurriedly escorted the child outside, protecting him from the horrific scene inside his home. The immediate cordoning off of the area signaled the start of a thorough investigation. As more police officers and forensic specialists arrived at the Balliol Street apartment, they started to piece together what happened before Barbara died. A single fatal stab wound to her chest was discovered during the initial examination of her body. Uncomfortably, there were also marks on her neck that might indicate strangulation. Barbara had bravely fought her assailant, as evidenced by the scratches and defensive wounds on her hands and arms that painted a picture of a fierce struggle. Further details were revealed by the condition of the apartment. Barbara's bedroom was out of order compared to the rest of the house. The room had items lying around in a haphazard manner, and there were obvious signs of a violent altercation. The investigator noticed the open closet door and surmised that robbery might have been a motive. Finding out exactly what might have been stolen, though, proved difficult at first. A few days later, the results of the autopsy support the preliminary conclusions. Although the strangulation marks on Barbara's neck were obvious, the cause of death was a stab wound to the heart. The foreign DNA found under Barbara's fingernails was a significant discovery, indicating that she may have managed to scratch her attacker in her final moments. These nail clippings were carefully preserved in the hopes that it may hold the key to catching her killer. The focus of the investigation then turned to interviewing witnesses. Interviews were conducted with Barbara's friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, and anyone else who knew her. The detectives had a lot of leads to follow after more than 295 witnesses provided their accounts. The sale of marijuana by Barbara as a side job caught everyone's attention. This fact was significant because it raised the possibility that she might have interacted with some sketchy characters during this trade. Barbara kept her marijuana in a cosmetics case in her closet, according to further inquiries. Only $12 was discovered in her wallet, and there was no other cash in the apartment, and the cosmetics case was obviously missing from the crime scene. The detectives were certain that robbery played a significant role in the murder's motivation. This hypothesis was supported by the missing cosmetics case and the lack of additional cash. However, as the police followed up on more leads in an effort to connect any of Barbara's clients to any suspicious activity or the foreign DNA, they ran into a brick wall. Although there was no conclusive evidence connecting any of her clients to the crime, the investigation took a new turn when Barbara's close circle was questioned, and they suggested another possible suspect. This person's motive was entirely different, and it changed the course of the investigation. The detective's task at this point was to follow up on this new lead while being careful not to miss any other potential leads. A name kept coming up in the interviews with people close to Barbara Brodkin as the investigation into her death progressed. The name was Christopher Barry, Barbara's former husband and Zachary's father. Christopher became a person of interest in the eyes of the police due to the couple's turbulent past, which was highlighted by a contentious custody dispute over their son. The police looked into Christopher's past and found some concerning information. Christopher had a violent tendency during their marriage and frequently physically and verbally abused Barbara. His tendency to act violently was not only present in his relationship with Barbara. He had been charged with assault in a separate incident and had even threatened Barbara with death on several occasions, particularly during their contentious custody battles. Because of his closeness to Barbara, familiarity with her daily routines, and obvious motive, Christopher quickly rose to the position of top suspect in the investigation. The Toronto police interrogated Christopher over a number of sessions in an effort to learn more. Christopher resisted their attempts to get him to confess as they interrogated him using a variety of techniques. He insisted that he had been with his girlfriend when the murder occurred. His girlfriend confirmed his alibi when the police contacted her, which complicated the investigation even more. The police suggested a polygraph test as a way to find out the truth. Without hesitation, Christopher agreed and ultimately aced the exam. Despite being frustrated, the investigators still had one card to play: to compare Christopher's DNA with the foreign DNA discovered under Barbara's fingernails. They requested samples of his hair and saliva from him. They were surprised when he immediately agreed. The samples were quickly sent for testing while the police eagerly awaited the results. They had faith that this would be the crucial turning point, but the outcomes fell short of their expectations. The sample's DNA did not match the DNA that was discovered at the crime scene. The investigation suffered a serious setback as a result of this revelation. The police had no choice but to release Christopher because there was no conclusive evidence connecting him to the crime and his alibi was still valid. Even though they were unable to corroborate it, he continued to be a top suspect in the eyes of many detectives. The leads eventually started to disappear as time went on. The once exciting investigation began to falter. The detectives had been hopeful of cracking the case, but they eventually hit a brick wall and the case was left unsolved for close to 25 years. Although the Barbara Brodkin's case was still an eerie mystery for young Zachary, the suffering and memories were still very recent. At the tender age of 6, the shock of finding his mother's lifeless body left a scar that never fully recovered. Zachary tried to advance as he grew older. He started a family and dealt with the aftermath of that terrible day. A glimmer of hope appeared in 2017. The Barbara Brodkin's case was reopened by the Toronto Police Department, and in a turn of events that seemed almost scripted by fate, Rob Thomas was assigned as the lead detective. The same Rob Thomas who had been the first to arrive at the Brodkins' home years earlier as a young detective. Rob Thomas had a strong emotional connection to the case because he was the department's top polygraph officer at this point in his career, and he had gained experience over the years. He would never be able to get rid of the image of a scared and distraught young Zachary. He was determined to solve this long-running puzzle. In the case's archives, Rob Thomas and his team combed through old case files in search of any overlooked information or missed connections. They initially considered re-interviewing Barbara's ex-husband, Christopher Barry, but they soon learned that Christopher had passed away in 2009, which put an end to that line of inquiry. The physical evidence from the crime scene, particularly the DNA found under Barbara's fingernails, provided the investigators with another lead that they followed up on. They hoped that improvements in forensic science would allow them to obtain a more precise DNA profile. The samples had been stored for more than 20 years and were now being delivered to the Forensic Science Center. The outcomes looked promising. A unique DNA profile was created. The team went to the National DNA Database of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police with this new piece of information in hand. DNA samples from criminals who had been convicted nationwide were stored in this database. The team was optimistic despite the slim chances. Despite all odds, a match was discovered. The DNA belonged to a man by the name of Charles Mustard. He was a person who had never come up during the initial investigation. This insight was revolutionary. For the first time in 24 years, there was a new prime suspect in the case. The detectives started looking into Charles Mustard's past right away. They discovered a number of unsettling facts and trends that combined to form a terrifying picture. The search for the truth about Barbara Brodkin's tragic death had taken many twists and turns, but this fresh lead gave hope for justice. Charles William Mustard, who was born in 1954, experienced both privilege and pressure in his life. He was the youngest of the 7 children born to Dr. William Mustard, a well-known Toronto surgeon, and his wife, Ellis Dr. William. His father was a heart surgery pioneer who earned the Order of Canada and a spot in the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. But in addition to his achievements and accolades, he was a strict and demanding father. The Mustard family ran their home with military efficiency. Dr. Williams had high standards, and he wasn't above using unusual punishments to instill discipline, like plunging a sluggish child into a chilly lake. Charles, however, had access to the best education money could buy despite his strict upbringing. Throughout his early years, he attended prestigious private and boarding schools. Later, he pursued a career in education and graduated from Lakehead University in Thunder Bay with degrees in physical education and education. His wife, whose name was kept a secret, was someone he met while he was attending university. She was an aspirant teacher just like him. Early in the 1990s, Charles, who is now a father of 2, began working as an elementary school teacher in the southern Ontario town of Thornhill. His life, however, took a dark turn when he was taken into custody at a nearby mall on multiple counts of barbaric assault. His job was lost due to this incident. He ran into Barbara around this time and bought some marijuana from her. Detectives later proposed that Charles's decision to rob and then kill Barbara may have been motivated by financial stress as a result of losing his job. For Charles, the 1990s were turbulent. He was sentenced to prison for his assault in 1993. Disappointed and worried about their kids, his wife left him 2 years later. In the following 15 years, Charles's criminal history grew. Between 1993 and 2007, he received 12 convictions for his crimes against women. 2011 saw the theft that was his most recent offense. Charles's DNA was entered into Canada's national database in 2002 as a result of his numerous arrests. By 2017, when the Toronto Police Department reopened Barbara's case, this entry would prove crucial. When they compared the DNA they had discovered under her fingernails to the national database, they discovered Charles's Mustard immediately. Charles's life had further descended into chaos by 2018. He was discovered to be reliant on Ontario disability support payments and living in subsidized housing in downtown Toronto. The Barbara Brodkin cold case underwent a sea change after the DNA match was made. The Toronto police were confident enough to make an arrest on October 18, 2018, in light of the newly discovered evidence and Charles's Mustard's troubling past. Under the guise of having him sign some paperwork, they called Mustard to the Toronto Police Department's headquarters. They strategically placed sizable Barbara pictures in the lobby while closely observing Mustard's response to it. He appeared to be paying close attention to the pictures. Charles's Mustard was formally detained the following day, on Friday, October 19, 2018, and charged with Barbara Brodkin's murder. A few months later, the matter quickly went to trial, which was presided over by Justice Brian O'Meara of the Ontario Superior Court. However, the trial took longer than 5 years and was anything but quick. Mustard insisted on his innocence throughout the entire trial. He portrayed Barbara and him as friendly acquaintances who shared a love for marijuana. He asserted that the last time he saw her was when he bought some marijuana on the side. He pretended not to know who Barbara was when asked about his close examination of her pictures at the police station. Given that Mustard had previously referred to Barbara as a friend, Justice O'Meara immediately characterized this as an obvious lie. The DNA evidence was the center of the prosecution's case. Mustard made an effort to explain it away by speculating that the DNA fusion may have originated from their joint of marijuana that they shared. This was disputed by forensic professionals, who claimed that such a casual interaction wouldn't leave any noticeable DNA traces under a person's fingernails. Mustard's defense tried desperately to place the blame on Christopher Barry, Barbara's ex-husband, by bringing up his history of abuse, but the prosecution was ready. They cited Christopher Barry's alibi and the fact that the DNA samples taken at the crime scene did not match Barry's. On February 23, 2023, Justice Brian O'Meara announced the verdict following a protracted trial. Barbara Brodkin was killed by Charles Mustard, who is now 69, and he was found guilty of second-degree murder. His release on bail was immediately revoked and he was arrested. The hearing on Mustard's sentence, which took place on Wednesday, April 5, 2023, marked the end of this protracted case's final chapter. He was given a 15-year term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was given in the Ontario Superior Court by Justice Brian O'Meara. Justice O'Meara asked Charles Mustard if he had any comments before delivering his punishment. Mustard got up from his chair to deny that he had killed Brodkin. He mentioned that he thought of Brodkin as a friend. In fact, they had a conversation the night before she died. In front of the judge, Mustard proclaimed, "Though I might meet my end in prison, I'm not scared of death. I stand here innocent." Justice eventually caught up with Charles Mustard after 3 long decades. He likely believed he had escaped the law for more than 20 years because he wasn't even a glimpse on the police's radar. But justice has a way of catching up. Rob Thomas, the policeman who first arrived on the scene of the crime in 1993, was crucial to the new investigation. During the formal announcement of the conviction, Detective Sergeant Stacy Gallant commended him for his dedication. Zachary, who was only 6 years old when he found his mother's dead body, is now 36 and has his own family. He will always carry the scars from that terrible day. Zachary, now going by the name Zachary Hefner, described the terrifying incident in a heartbreaking statement that was read aloud in court. "The moment I entered that door is when my entire life changed. It took my 6-year-old mind several minutes to fully take in and understand the horror of what I was looking at. My mother was dead." Barbara's cousin, Herb Brodkin, spoke on the family's behalf after the conviction. He said, "I thought it was a very well-reasoned verdict. I'm very proud of the judge for what he did." He thanked the Toronto police for their unwavering dedication to the investigation, which provided the family with much-needed closure. Herb added, "Up until recently, I thought cold cases were just something that happened in a TV series in the States. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.